Does this make me all the way to the left or all the way to the right, Jeff?
As with most things, it's all about your perspective.
I just actually pulled off a minor miracle.
Yes.
I am the chair of the National Chavuot Committee.
Congratulations. Or no.
Exactly.
For
Right,
both.
as they say, the happiest words are past chair of.
Yeah, yes.
And so we had hammered out our COVID policy. And then we changed our COVID policy to be a little more liberal because things are getting better.
Yes.
And people got heartily offended that we made it more liberal. Some people who had only signed up because they thought we were being
More Mahmir.
more mahmir. And so we had a meeting Monday night to hammer out where we're going to land. And I wrote up the document yesterday morning, and I got everybody to sign off on it, and we got it out at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Huh. That's impressive.
So, we had been requiring testing every morning before you left your room, which we did last summer, and I'm proud to admit we were not a spreader event last summer. But all the medical experts we talked to said that's a little extreme.
For last summer, yes, good idea. This summer, probably over.
So we're having everybody test before they come and on Sunday morning.
Okay.
So we're running Friday through Tuesday. So, and masks required indoors.
Okay.
And we're holding as many activities as we can outdoors. We're renting tents with sides without sides on them, so there's airflow.
Sounds eminently reasonable.
Correct.
Okay. 4 people will complain. That's my prediction.
Well, it's funny because 2 families were like trying to decide whether they were going to ask for their money back. And 2 other families said, because you really relax things, we're planning on coming.
So 0-sum game.
4 people complained, we're 4 families. But I think I've gotten both sides that they're still coming from both sides. So I didn't lose anybody, I think.
I was quiet, like those restrictions, I wouldn't come. If I had signed up, I would have stopped.
Would you have signed up with the original restrictions of testing every day? So you people were saying, we're signing up because there's not testing.
I understand. It's ridiculous.
Yes, you deserve it. You want help?
Yes. Okay, this is the message from Rachel.
When you get there, can you just push the TV back a little so we can see the podium? Yeah. Okay. I got it.
You got it? It's good, Marcia, thank you. Oh, it's good, okay. It's good, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Are you the man behind the curtain?
What? Oh, I was just following instructions.
Yes, there is. I'm going to go get some.
Are we still there?
I think so.
Well, yes. No, we are going to start the. You would be here, but you can't reach. It's like, please, that's okay.
It's got just a real person.
Yes, no, I was actually. He was going with it once I see.
I was enjoying the how you went.
Rabbi Ami, can you move it back a little bit? Now it's not facing the full podium. Thank you. I had it okay. Perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. Hi, Mrs. Pyle.
Hi, guys. I don't know. Around 40, 50. Questions, those two answers that I sent. Yeah. I like.
Not everything. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. His answer's a little.
I can't remember your name.
I have pictures in the.
Yeah, that's what it was either in the beginning or it's in the end. So it's. Yeah.
That's considered devotion to drive. Well, just that's what.
Yeah. So that would be 2.5 years. The only one who ever called me up was my dad. I even pushed up. Joe getting super bad. Right now, I'm counting my lines. Yeah, like that. Yeah, I know. Let's say. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, it's a lot of pressure. Okay.
There's a lot of factors. But it came out. He switched up. And that was the day I tossed him. Yeah.
Yeah. First time in my life, she made me a trend center. Because I was the only man. I see. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, less than 50 people. Keep going. She doesn't have. No, we're not half here. I can't expect her. Well, yeah. Well, no, you can walk off all the food you're gonna eat, but I don't want to waste the time. Okay? That's me too. Yeah. Long and winding road is also.
Don't do anything.
Something.
Well, it's part of that, yes. My. It's like. And make my brain. Like that.
There's gonna be a lighting station.
Yes, okay. A lot of people come in trouble.
Yes.
Half of a high school. One was in my car, one was by my phone. Correct. I know.
It's like, you know, like right before we started. It was like, you know, my partner friends were making out. That's seriously.
I'm here for.
Okay, Sabirin, if I could spare your attention, as you can tell from the Sidurim on the tables in front of you, we're going to start, excuse me, with Mincha. We'll do a quick Mincha so as to enable several people who need to say Kaddish, and then we'll begin our study.
$64.
164.
Page 164. Actually, it's a Divat Adonai, that will be very for Basar, Simple Cholo, and I will not very fear, hallelujah. If that are the Kadash, Mirabah, and that you take a big month to take the head from the Mikon, for the cell, but a big month carry the drum. Amen. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו אלוהי אברהם אלוהי יצחק אלוהי יעקב אלוהי תודה אלוהי ישראל אחר אלוהי ליח אלוהי דיבור והנורא אל עליון אומר צדים טובים קונה הכל וזוכר כזאבות ומגיזו אל לבני בהם למען שמו באהבה אנחנו חוזר פוגל מושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני אברהם ובני שרה אתה כבר אמר מחימיתים אתה והושיע על חיים בחסד, מקיים איתם ברחמים רבים, סומך נפיל ורפא כל אימתי עשויים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני יפה, מלחמו הבא גבורות ומדבר מלך, מלך ממית ומציאת ישוע, ולמען אתה להחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני, מקיים המתים. את שמך בעולם. כשם שמקדישים אותו בשני מרום, כך כתוב על הנביאך בעיקר הזה. אל זה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלך כבודו, לעומתם ברוך ימינו. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, דברי קודשך כתוב לאמור. תמלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לבדו, הללויה, לבדו נגיד לך, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחה אלוהים יקנו לעמו שלום בעת, כי מלך גדול קדוש אתה, ברוך אתה, אדוני, האל הקדוש. Probably 3 of them. יתגדל ויתגדש מרבה. תמליך מלכותי בחלקון במחנכך בישראל ואחנכי באמרו אמן. ברך וישתבח ויתפאר ותרומה ונעשה ויתהדר ותעלה שמי לקודשה. לא מכל היתר ושגתה תשבחתה ונתתה במילם בעלמה באמרו אמן. קבל צלחתם ועצמן לכל ישראל תלמוד וישמעיה באמרו. שמע רבים שמע וכם עליהם כל ישראל ואמרו. נעשה פעמים רמה הפכו יעשה שלום עליהם בכל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עלינו לשבח ואדון הכל. אנחנו קוראים ומשתתפים מודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שלו. כן, נקבל. מלכות שלך תהיה עמו בכבוד, כידוע תורתך אדוני מלך העולם והארץ, ונאמר וקיים המלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא אדוני אחד, שמו אחד. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ואמר זכורת ידותי, וימליך מלכותי, וחיי כל יום אחד וחיי בכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל שמי לקודשה ואלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה ושבחתה ונחמתה ואמירם בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה משמיה וקיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו עושה שלום במרומה הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו
Yishar Kochaka. Habirim, you may be seated. Everyone, welcome. In a moment, we're going to begin our study. I just want to welcome everyone. It's great to see all of you. Tonight's combined program began actually during Sukkot, when the waters rose and our building was unusable, and in a very quick last-minute arrangement, Congregation Ohav Shalom opened its portals to us, and we had a lovely Shabbat, Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah together. And so as the days of the Omer started to tick by, I reached out to Rabbi Ornstein and said, we should do that again, except this time we should plan. And so was born tonight's idea of joining together for a Tikkun Leil Shavuot. And tomorrow morning over at Ohav Shalom, where we'll join together to stand with our ancestors at the foot of Sinai. And tonight we're going to study. As to tonight's topic, as Rabbi Ornstein and I were looking for a brainstorm, he noted that our senior colleague, Rabbi Harold Kushner, had just recently passed away, and suggested that it would be timely to study a little bit of his teaching and his influence and use it as a springboard for our conversation this evening. So since it was his suggestion, I'm going to turn it over to him. And I'll just note that we are happy to welcome not one, not two, but four colleagues to Temple Israel. Here's Rabbi Ornstein, Rabbi Monson, Rabbi Gulak, and Rabbi Magnuson. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. That's coming up. Can you hear me with that? Let me make sure you can. Good. It's really a pleasure. I was just saying to Richard Rubin how nice it is for us not to be looking at each other on the screen today, and to actually be together in person, learning Torah together in preparation for receiving the Torah. As Rabbi Ellenberg mentioned to you, our topic tonight is the legacy of Rabbi Harold Kushner, particularly but not exclusively around his best-selling book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Not only was it a bestseller, but to my mind, it was in some respects one of the most revolutionary books of contemporary American religion, not just Judaism, contemporary American religion, ever written in the 20th century for a variety of different reasons that we'll talk about a little bit tonight. What we want to do this evening, what my colleagues and I have decided to do, is to have each of us speak just for a few minutes to some of the basic ideas that Rabbi Kushner popularized, some would even say innovated in When Bad Things Happen to Good People. I'm going to read a passage from the book, sort of as our touch point. You have copies of those passages. We selected 2 passages from the book. How many of you read the book, by the way? Have you read excerpts? So many of you have. I highly recommend it. It will either exhilarate you or tick you off no end. It is a fascinating read in kind of radical traditional Jewish theology. That's all I can say right now. But we'll look at one of those passages tonight, and then each of us will respond, and then we'll kind of talk to each other a little bit. Then afterwards, we'll have married at 9 o'clock and have some dinner and just enjoy each other's company, and then come back together around 9:30 or so for a little bit more conversation, really with all of you. So that's kind of what the order of the evening is going to be. Harold Kushner was the rabbi at Temple Israel in Natick, Massachusetts for about 25 years. As he began to publish more and more, particularly after When Bad Things Happen to Good People, became really a smash hit literarily. He stepped down from that pulpit and became not the rabbi emeritus at Temple Israel in Natick, but the rabbi laureate. He was known for quite a number of years as the rabbi laureate at Temple Israel. Rabbi Kushner wrote this book, as he says at the beginning of the book, as a response to the untimely death of his 14-year-old son, Aaron, of a horrible degenerative disease, a congenital disease known as progeria, which is rapid aging. Aaron was not developing well as a young child when Harold and his wife, Suzette, blessed memory, began to sort of investigate what was going on. They finally received the diagnosis of progeria, and what was explained to them was that Aaron would rapidly age and die sometime in early adolescence. So hurt and distraught was Rabbi Kushner, who, as he says in the book itself, until that time in his young rabbinic career, he would have been a more or less, passable pastor, maybe even an indifferent pastor in terms of dealing with people's issues and problems. It was when he began to experience personal tragedy like this that he began to rethink so much of what he had been taught about sort of the traditions about both not so much the goodness of God, but the fact that the reason why bad things happen to good people is, as the tradition tells us, invariably because either God is punishing us, God has perfect and mysterious reasons for punishing, for causing us to suffer. God is testing us, whatever it happens to be. Rabbi Kushner, in the face of personal tragedy, could no longer accept that idea. And so over the years, as Aaron was getting sicker and sicker, and then sort of in the time ensuing after his death, he wrote and then finally was able to publish When Bad Things Happen to Good People. The book really hit a nerve with the American, the English-speaking public. It was translated into many, many different languages, because in the book, what Rabbi Kushner basically says, I'm going to look at that passage tonight from the book, he basically says this: if we have to make a choice between the perfect goodness of God, the all-powerful nature of God, and the fact that bad things happen to good people, we essentially have to choose 2 of the 3. If people suffer, right, good people suffer, even though the tradition tells us that only bad people will suffer and good people will be rewarded. If good people, like Job, of the book of Job in the Bible, suffer, then you can either choose to say that God is all good and doesn't want people to suffer, but can't stop them from suffering, because God is not necessarily all-powerful, something we're trained to believe from the time we're very young. Or you have to accept the fact
that the person who is suffering is really suffering because God is all powerful, but chooses not to be good. That's not really a great option because we want to believe not only in an all powerful God, but we also want to believe, obviously, in an all good God, a God of justice who commands us to do justice as well. The other possibility, of course, is to say, well, no, the goodness of God and the power of God remain intact. And if you suffer, it's your fault, right? You suffer for good reason. God has God's reasons. Even if you, like Job in the book of Job, say, I'm sorry, but I protest my innocence. I should not have to suffer in this kind of a way. That's the core of Kushner's argument, that ultimately, if he has to make a choice among those three, he's going to choose to side with the sufferer, to say you're suffering. Obviously, there are people who suffer because of things they do to themselves, but that your suffering is not from God, because the all-good God, even the all-good God, cannot stop certain things from happening because of chaos, because of free will, because of lots of different kinds of things. And then ultimately, if he has to choose to get rid of the traditional philosophical category of God is all-powerful in order to retain the integrity of the sufferer, right? The integrity of the human being who suffers and the integrity of God's goodness, Kushner chooses to retain those two and to basically reject the idea that God is an all-powerful God. Well, you can imagine what this did to the high Brahmins of theological culture in America. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The book was both wildly received and also wildly criticized. Because what was Kushner doing essentially? He was essentially taking, essentially not so much the bromides, but the core traditions that we in sort of within the Western religious tradition have always been raised to believe God is all good, God is all knowing, God is all powerful, and to say, I no longer believe in the idea of an all powerful God because I care more about the human being who suffers for no reason and more about the goodness of the all good God than I do about the power of the all powerful God. So why don't we do this, guys? That's sort of just our little introduction. Let me read a passage for you, and then we're just going to kind of go down, up and down our panel, and have each one of our my distinguished colleagues say a few words about their thoughts about Rabbi Kushner, maybe this passage in particular. So if you look at passage number 1, this is all, by the way, from Kushner's book. I have to say, by the way, guys, the book is really, in many respects, a very sophisticated read and a very easy read. It's the kind of book he wrote it with such, I don't even know what the word is, there's such simplicity to what he writes. You can basically polish it off in an afternoon and find that you have really dug into some really big ideas. So I'm going to read for you this one passage from Kushner's book. I believe this is from the 2nd chapter, where Kushner, talking about the book of Job, the righteous man who suffers, and who wants to know why he suffers, right? And tries to get an answer from God. Let me just read this for you, and then we're going to start off with our discussion. Suppose, we have a couple more sheets here. Innocent people do suffer misfortunes in this life. Things happen to them far worse than they deserve. They lose their jobs, they get sick, their children suffer or make them suffer. But when it happens, it does not represent God punishing them for something they did wrong. The misfortunes do not come from God at all. There may be a sense of loss at coming to this conclusion. In a way, it was comforting to believe in an all-wise, all-powerful God who guaranteed fair treatment and happy endings, who reassured us that everything happened for a reason. Even as life was easier for us, we could believe that our parents were wise enough to know what to do and strong enough to make everything turn out right. But it was comforting the way the religion of Job's friends was comforting. It worked only as long as we did not take the problems of innocent victims seriously. When we have met Job, when we have been Job, we cannot believe in that sort of God any longer without giving up our own right to feel angry, to feel that we've been treated badly by life. From that perspective, there ought to be a sense of relief in coming to the conclusion that God is not doing this to us. If God is a God of justice and not of power, then God can still be on our side when bad things happen to us. God can know that we're good and honest people who deserve better. Our misfortunes are none of God's doing, and so we can turn to God for help. Our question will not be God's question, Job's question, God, why are you doing this to me? But rather, God, see what is happening to me. Can you help me? We will turn to God, not to be judged or forgiven, not to be rewarded or punished, but to be strengthened and comforted. If we have grown up, as Job and his friends did, believing in an all-wise, all-powerful, all-knowing God, it will be hard for us, as it was hard for them, to change our way of thinking about God, as it was hard for us when we were children, to realize that our parents were not all-powerful, that a broken toy had to be thrown out because they could not fix it, not because they didn't want to. But if we can bring ourselves to acknowledge that there are some things God does not control, many good things become possible. We will be able to turn to God for things God can do to help us instead of holding on to unrealistic expectations of God, which will never come about. The Bible, after all, repeatedly speaks of God as the special protector of the poor, the widow, and the orphan, without raising the question of how it happened that they became poor, widowed, or orphaned in the first place. Pretty heavy stuff. How about you, Matt? Why don't we start with you?
Oh, thank you. No pressure. So I've been playing with how to begin to handle all this. Those of you who know me who don't know me, my congregation is a very select one. I'm a rabbi in 3 correctional facilities and the psychiatric hospital here in Albany. And so I see a lot of people who, there was a client when I first came to work at the Psych Center 22 years ago, who I think they put every new chaplain in to go see him because he had been hit by a truck as a young child, and he had been in the hospital ever since because he had traumatic brain injury. And so he walked and looked like he had cerebral palsy. That wasn't why he was in the psych hospital. He was in the psych hospital because one of the side effects of traumatic brain injury is sudden, unreasonable bouts of rage. And once a year or so, he would totally lose it. And he really severely hurt some people sometimes. When he did that, he's since been discharged to a nursing home, but he spent over 40 years in psychiatric hospitals. And the first thing that he said to me was, why did God let this happen to me? Which is why I said they stuck all new chaplains in there first. Go deal with that. Because first you had to understand what he was saying because his speech was difficult to understand. And then on the spur of the moment, you had to come up with an answer. And my answer is in part Mr. Rogers' answer. Is when bad things happen, to look for the good people, right? The people who are helpers, the people who are there with you, who stick with you through all of these things. And I'm with Rabbi Kushner in that I don't have a pat answer to why this kid was hit by a truck when he was 12. That I can't answer, and there's no good answer for. And so my answer for that is in a later chapter, he talks about the Garden of Eden and the idea of seeing some of God contracting out of creation, making broken places in order to give us free will. And I think that serves 2 purposes. One, the idea of free will is we make choices all the time. That's what I teach people about all the time in my work in prison is trying to learn to make better choices. And I believe we have free will and that we have to make choices based on that. But I also believe that the purpose of the brokenness that was caused by God contracting out of this level of creation is part of our purpose in life. I don't believe that God created us to be lotus eaters. The whole world was not the Garden of Eden. Only the Garden of Eden was the Garden of Eden. And I believe that the tree of knowledge of good and evil was the trip switch, was when people were ready to start challenging things and becoming challenged, We made a choice. And then we were out into the rest of the world where you have to sweat, or you're living by the sweat of your brow, and you have to make connections with people, and you have to do the tough stuff. And when one of the worst things we do to, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to call them inmates anymore, to incarcerated individuals, is we take away from them any way of having purpose in their life. When we put somebody in solitary, now we've done the halt thing, and we're trying to make people have more to do with their days while they're there. But for people in a max prison, you have to really make a choice and fight hard in order to put purpose in your days. And I think that's the challenge for all of us, is to find ways to connect with one another, to look for where the good people are, and to make good choices. Keep our peace.
I think first and foremost is the harsh reality is there is no answer. I think that's in my opinion, that's the hardest part for people to realize is there is no answer. There are situations where there are medical conditions and you have to accept them, but it's not necessarily an answer. And I think that's where people struggle the most, is not having an answer. Why? Just the basic question of why did this happen to me, or why did this happen to my loved one? I remember about 25 years ago, sitting in the hospital with my sister-in-law's grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor, and being in the hospital room where my sister-in-law's first cousin was 14 years old, was a tennis player, and I mean, just a total superstar, all around wonderful person. And she collapsed on the tennis court, and all of a sudden was connected to every tube known to men. And I'm sitting there with her grandmother who survived the Holocaust, who turns to me and said, "How could this happen? I survived the Holocaust, and she's 14 years old. She'll never be able to live her life. She hasn't lived yet." And unfortunately, Miriam passed away, and they're the nicest family ever. I call them Uncle Danny and I'm sure they asked the question over and over again, but their answer was not to question God per se. Their answer was to keep being good people and to keep doing well and to keep instilling in their other two children good moral and ethical behavior and being a good person. Because I think one of the questions that comes up is, why am I a good person if these tragedies are going to happen to me, or they're going to happen to a member of my family? And I think that's one of the questions that comes up a lot. And I'm not sure if it was really totally touched upon in the book, where I didn't feel that I found a particular line that connected, but I feel in my experience, that is one of the toughest things is, are we good people in life because we're expecting to be rewarded every time we do something good, that we are guaranteed nothing's going to happen to us, nothing severe is going to happen. We'll have our regular ups and downs, but nothing to the extreme. That's a really unrealistic way of looking at life. And I think the hardest part to say is that stuff happens, things happen, and the hardest part is accepting. And everybody in this room, I guarantee it, every single person in this room has some story, either related to them personally or to someone they love, or even a good friend who's suffered some kind of tragedy or watched someone pass on that they thought they were going to live their entire life with, grow together, spend time together, and enjoy all these different highlights in life. And it was actually kind of interesting. I decided to reread Big Elon root a little bit. And one of the things that came up that I found that I thought was just interesting, I thought would relate a little bit, was it says, Ki Marli Ma'od Mikem Ki Yatsa Ki Yad Adonai. And basically what Ruth is saying is that because my daughters-in-law, because my sons married out of Judaism, married Romites, that's why I suffered losing my husband and losing both my sons. And it was sort of a blame game. And I think this is exactly what Naomi is going through in trying to find an answer to why all this happens. And she points fingers. She points fingers at her daughters-in-law without trying to be mean, but the reality is she kind of is. And I think she's struggling with the fact that that's one of the reasons she tells her daughters-in-law, just go back to Moab, because I want to live a good life. I've had enough tragedy. I just want to move on and whatnot. And I think it's something the rabbis don't talk about as much, but I think that there's this whole desire for answers. That's my premise, is that there's a desire for an answer. And the answer is there is no answer. And I think that, to be honest, and reading this book and reading it multiple times and going through different stages of my life where I've had friends or family who have suffered major loss, and they're the greatest people in the world, that I've understood that there is no answer, and that my opinion over time goes flip-flop as to, is there a reason that everything happens? That is one of the things that I struggle with. I think when I was younger, I thought everything happened for reasons. And now I don't know if I can even answer that question because of everything that I've seen throughout my lifetime.
Yeah, why don't you go next? You want to do the cleanup? Someone. This is a wonderful book, in part because it asks the right questions. What I do not agree with are Rabbi Kushner's theological answers. As everyone has said, particularly Rabbi Dan, Kushner does not believe in an omnipotent God. He does not mention the Olam Haba, the world to come. So I assume he does not believe in that either. As rabbis asked, when commenting on the first commandment, how can one be commanded to believe in God? One cannot command belief. Either one believes or one doesn't believe. We could stand here for the rest of the evening and argue about it, but the fact is I can't talk you into it, or I can't talk you out of it. Belief is not logical. What I believe is that as mere human beings, we cannot know or fully understand what God does and why God does it. Why does a child suffer the horrible disease of progeria as Kushner's son did? Why do millions of people suffer in wars and starvation, horrible deaths every day, right? You watch the news, you listen to the news. It's beyond what we can fathom. Why the Holocaust? Why did one person arrive on time to work on 9/11 only to be killed in the Twin Towers, and another had a subway delay and it saved their life? I don't know. As I used to say to people who asked me when I worked at geriatric chaplaincy, why did God make me fall and break my bone and force me to be stuck in a wheelchair for the rest of my life? And I would say, if I could answer your question, I would be God. And I would change things. Unfortunately, I'm just a rabbi, a person like you. What I can do is listen to you, feel your hurt and frustration at not being able to walk, and I can give you support and love. There are many stories in our tradition where people try to find out the reason
for God's mysterious actions. Most of these stories are not very satisfying theologically. I went looking at some of these. Most of these stories are not satisfying in solving the problem of evil in the world. One example was a rabbi travels with Elijah around the world as Elijah works wonders. After Elijah has completed his rounds, he explains to the rabbi why he has done certain things that create hardship, but are really helpful to the so-called victims. For example, Elijah goes to the home of some poor people and he knocks down the wall of the house. And the rabbi said, "Why did you do that?" Elijah explains to him that when the poor family digs a foundation to put up the new wall, they're going to find a treasure. But the world doesn't work like that. That doesn't help us with terrible events on a large scale, the Holocaust, 9/11. One answer that he, again, it's not logical, so he's not going to bring it, that has brought comfort to Jews and others for millennia, is the Olam Haba, the concept of a world to come after this life. Of course, this is a concept that this life is not the only one, and that there is reward and punishment in the world to come. This has brought comfort to many, including me. If you were taught that Jews don't believe in life after death, as many, particularly Reformed Jews, were taught, you really should read Neil Gaiman's book, The Depth of Death, which details the history of the Jewish belief in the Olam Haba, in life after death. No, it's really not logical. It's like, I'm gonna argue with you about you should believe in God. I'm not gonna be able to argue with you about you should believe in God righting some of these wrongs in the world to come. One thing that got me thinking was a conversation I had once with a friend of mine who was Hindu. And we were talking not about the world to come, but about the concept of reincarnation. And she said to me, a loving God didn't give us just one chance in this world. And it set me thinking, even if I say, okay, a loving God is not going to just give us whatever we're going to get in this world, that there must be something else after it. There's another thing that I love about Kushner's book. Beyond his wonderful questions, he also has wonderful solutions. His solutions remind me of this Hasidic story. The Hasidic master rabbi Moshe Leib of Sassow taught that no human attribute was created in vain. His student could not resist challenging him. He asked him, so what use can denial of God's existence have? Why did God create atheists? The master looked at him and answered, when someone comes to you and says that they are in need, you should not say, God will provide, but you must act as if, in fact, there is no one else to act but you. That means it is up to us to give the support to those who are hurting. God may have sent 3 angels or messengers to visit Abraham when he was recuperating from his circumcision, but we can't count on that for ourselves all the time. Visiting those who are suffering, listening to them, saying something that shows that you have heard what it is that they are saying. If you're capable of doing that, and if you're not capable of doing that, saying nothing. Bring comfort and support to those who are hurting. Don't add your own surahs, your own problems. Don't try to answer for God, which is exactly the type of thing that Kushner talks about. When someone tries to ask why God did something to hurt them, I think the best answer has to be, I can't answer that, but I am here with you to support you. I hope that will help in some way, however small. We need to act as if God isn't there. We need to be God's helpers in this world, which is exactly what he was saying. Even though we may believe that God will ultimately help in this world or in the next. Who's next?
I guess that's me. So in rereading Kushner for now, I don't know how many times, I sort of come back to my first reaction over and over again, which is, and he kind of admits it at the beginning, he says, I'm not really a philosopher. And so as philosophy and theology, I find him sometimes a little schmuck, but I think he would say, David, what's really good about the book? The book is great when it comes to comfort. And that's what he's trying to bring to the table. How do I change the question and the conversation so that the person who is suffering is not in opposition with God, but rather can find in God a cosmic shoulder upon which to lean in a moment of weakness, to cry upon in a moment of sorrow, and to find comfort in an impossible situation. That's the brilliance of Kushner's book. He reframes the entire conversation, and I joked with Rabbi Dan about this beforehand. He gets there by following the musical trope, thank you, of Meatloaf. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I can't have all of the God that I've been bequeathed, if you will, for generations, but I can have the best parts of God, the parts that can really make a difference. And so he looks at everything through that prism. You know, he talks about the story of creation. And it's not just about God creating and judging and saying it's good, it's really good, but rather it is about God pushing against what is often glossed over in that first sentence. What's at the beginning? Tohu vabohu. You know, wild and waste. Everett Fox's translation. He likes to alliterate the same way that tohu vabohu, wild and waste. It's chaos. And what does God do? God pushes against the chaos. But it's a process that doesn't end when Shabbos begins. I mean, Kushner, you see, basically says, God gets to the point where it's time to do candles on Friday, and he's not done. The Kadosh Baruch Hu has to finish reining in all the chaos. And so it's there in the world. And it's going to impact on all of us. And part of our role as a creation that is both part of the natural world and part of the divine realm is to keep pushing against the chaos. It's never going to go away. But that's our role, is to try to continue to bring chaos. And I don't know that Kushner would say this. Bring order, yes. We're very good at being, we're really good at bringing chaos. But, you know, and I don't know if Kushner would say this, but I would overlay it with, that's the whole point of Torah. It is about guiding us to making good choices and correct decisions. You know, when we, you know, how many of those stories that you told were about people who were harmed by people who made bad choices, by people who chose to express the worst of themselves rather than the best of themselves? You know, the person who gets behind the wheel of the car when they're drunk, the person who doesn't put their firearm away properly, the person who endangers others or causes others harm by their behavior. That's chaos operating in our world, but it's the chaos that we could have at least controlled if we followed the rule book better. That's what the Torah is. It's how do you push against the chaos? And how do you use it as a springboard so that you can manifest the best version of yourself and do all those things that Rabbi Magidson described? Being there for someone. You are God's cosmic shoulder in the world because you're the one who goes to the Shiva house and you're the one who helps the person who's in a moment of sorrow, of sadness, and is in need of help. That's what Kushner gives us. He gives us. And he gives us back a dynamic relationship with God that allows us to cry on God's shoulders. That it allows us to not be distanced from God at a moment when we desperately need to feel this cosmic hug. That's the brilliance of Krishna.
And this is the part where we get to talk to each other for a couple of minutes. All right, and you guys can jump in after dinner. So this is what's so interesting about the book. There is, in some respects, as radical as people perceive the book to be, there are aspects of Kushner's theology and Kushner's whole notion of pushing against the chaos that are right there in the tradition, right? Because the Jewish tradition is not simply some,
Single trope.
right, it's not a single trope. We are not a philosophical tradition in terms of sort of, here's the church dogma, this is what we believe, this is what we don't believe. We're much more complex. And so the very rabbis who will say that everything happens because God wants it to happen that way, whether it's to test us, or to strengthen us, or to educate us, or to punish us, whatever it is, those are the very same rabbis who in the very same breath say that God suffers with us and feels brokenness with us when things happen, right? When the bad things happen to good people. This is the same rabbinic tradition that produces an Isaac Luria in Safat, in the Holy City of Tzfat in Israel, in the 16th century, who basically talks about this idea of creation not yet being completed because of the fact that rather than the beautiful, orderly picture of creation, which you find in the book of Genesis, there is a story behind that story, which is a story of cataclysm, of a God who tries to create a magnificently ordered world, and even God can't completely contain that chaotic element. Luria is talking about this whole notion of the breaking of the vessel, seeds to which I talked about before. All of those things are right there in the tradition. I don't agree with what Kushner does with Job, but the truth is, look, the book of Job is in many respects a searingly complex book. Precisely because of the very same God who comes out of the whirlwind at the end of the book and says to Job, shut up, you don't know any better, right? You will never be able to understand the divine mysteries, right? This book is very much a book about who knows what when, right? It's a book about knowledge and who has access to knowledge. That very same God, we know from the beginning of the book, is the one who made Job suffer in the first place to win a bet with the adversary. It's a very good question.
Does that mean that the chaos spills over to the next week after Havdalah? All of a sudden, we go into this next week. There's a sense of completion of that week that we have to have an expectation that there are going to be things that are negative that are going into the next week.
Right, that's right. And so we reach Shabbat, and so we do, Rabbi, right? So Shabbat becomes this ritual. Remember what ritual is. Ritual is an attempt to take certain kinds of mythological ideas, right? This idea of movement towards completion and to sort of, to do what? To ritualize it, right? To sort of act it out. That's what Shabbat is. It's this whole drama. And then of course, what you do, you then have to end Shabbat and move back into the week, into the world of imperfection.
And you're constantly, I don't know about the rest of you, or the rest of you, right? I have this crazy notion that on Friday, I try to clear off my desk. Okay? Now, in order to accomplish that on Fridays, it means open the drawer, put, close the drawer.
Natural organization.
Okay? But the desk looks like, oh, okay, everything's fixed. I know that what's waiting for me after Shabbos is over, it's not gonna go away, but on a sort of psychological, spiritual level, this is my like last preparation for getting ready for Shabbat. There's certain things that I do that say, I know I'm not done, but I'm gonna step into the divine mode. The Kadosh Baruch Hu said, Adkan, Friday is the end of the 6 days of working and pushing and doing, and Shabbos is Shabbos, and I need Shabbos. And so I push the stuff into the drawer, and I close the drawer, and I turn off my cell phone, and you know, there's certain quote pre-Shabbos rituals that are part of the preparation for, but it's not because I'm done. It's not because I'm not done. I'm never done. We're never finished. You know, when the Torah said, "Sheshet yamim taseh la'atecha," 6 days, do your work. That wasn't well, if you feel like it. It's like, no, you got stuff to do for 6 days. You got to help make the world better. You need to do all the stuff. You are the extension of sanctity and of godliness in the world. And boy, if you do it right, you're going to be tired by the time you get to Shabbos, and you need Shabbos to recharge and rejuvenate yourself and connect with people in a different way.
And be resold.
Be resold.
So it was interesting because I was listening to Rabbi Magnuson when she was talking about reincarnation. And back at the beginning of COVID, the Department of Corrections asked me to put together an uplifting talk just before, in the fall of 2019, incarcerated individuals had gotten tablets that they could download things. They're not free access to the internet, but they can download things to watch in their cells. And so the department was trying to get some uplifting words from chaplains to put on the tablets. And so I wrote a 10-minute, 15-minute talk about what happens after you die. And I get a call from the lead chaplain in central office saying, "We asked you to talk about something uplifting." And I said, first of all, everybody's thinking about this, right? It's COVID. We're all dealing with mortality. And second of all, what you think happens when you die should shape how you're living your life. And so when I go and teach in the new step-down units from solitary, don't ask me about it, I'm putting it aside for now. But one of the things I do all the time as a topic is I talk about what do you think happens when you die. So if you hold that this is it, which is what a lot of guys tell me, I say, think of somebody who you loved who has passed on, what ripples did they leave, right? That we want to leave good ripples. You know, there are people who've left bad ripples in your life, and there are people who leave good ripples in your life. And who do you want to be, right? And I go through the reward and punishment stuff, and then I get to Gilgul Neshamas. I get to reincarnation, which, notice I used a Hebrew word for because Jews do believe in it, especially in the more mystic traditions. And that is something that I really have come to as a belief for myself, that I think that it takes more than one lifetime to get it right. I'm with Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who says that we are trying all the time. We come into this world at one place on the spectrum between 0 and 100 of goodness. And our goal in each lifetime is to move up that spectrum. And that each time we make good choices, we can move up, but that the lessons that keep coming back in life, and we all have them, right? Something that you need to learn that is going to come back in one form or another until you figure it out, right? That at the end of this lifetime, you sit down with the heavenly guidance counselor and you look over your life and you say, all right, I really got this one straight, but boy, did I blow, organic chemistry. I got to take that class over again, right? And so when I'm talking with incarcerated individuals, I'm like, do you want to do this again?
No, then you're gonna learn the lesson now, so you don't do it again, whether it's another time with the Department of Corrections or whether it's in the next lifetime. And I think that that's part of my answer to when bad things happen, is to say, what is it I'm supposed to learn here? And I find that that, for me, is much better than pinprick.
Really, all I would add to this, and I think we need to remember this is not something that was invented by Harold Kushner. This is already there in early Talmudic literature.
Oh, definitely.
The very same rabbis who say, God punishes, God does this, God does that, right? Are the exact same rabbis who say, you are never supposed to speak to the person who suffers in the way that Job's friends spoke to him. Right? Look, there's theology, right? And there's some discussion about the ways of God, whether you accept Kushner's approach or you don't accept Kushner's approach. And then there's religion, as Rabbi Gilman, blessed memory, used to teach us all the time, which is that in the place where we meet the sufferer, where we are the sufferer, as a community, we have a responsibility. What is the most godly thing that we can do? And Rabbi David talked about this before, we all talk about this, is we walk the path with the sufferer. You don't sit there telling the sufferer who says, why me? Really, why me is not really a theological question. It's a cry of pain, right? We walk with the sufferer and we don't talk to the sufferer in the way that Job's friends spoke to Job, which is, listen, must have been your fault. Must be some good reason. Just you don't know, right? The rabbis who were so traditional in their approach to the God of power, the God who punishes, et cetera, would never have countenanced that kind of behavior. In fact, they say it very clearly. That is not the way that Jews behave when we are in community with those who suffer.
It's interesting because you referenced it. It was the idea that God goes with Israel wherever they go. God goes into Galut, into diaspora with the Jews when they're exiled to Babylonia. God cries for all the suffering of the Jewish people. And and at one point he's going like, it's one of the prophets is talking to, I don't know which one, and he's going like, oh, you're useless. Go find Abraham. Go find Jeremiah. Those guys knew how to cry. I need good criers. I need people who can sympathize with me, who can comfort me. And even if it's only to cry with me because we don't have answers. Kushner's right. You said it too. We don't, and you said it. We don't know the answers to certain questions. They're impossible. But the one thing I know for certain is that we can make a difference. And that's, I think, a central part of Kushner's message. And I'm going to revoke host privilege and note that it is just 9 o'clock now. And so we're gonna pause here and do Mari. And by the time Mari is done, even if the food isn't out now, it will be by the time we're done. And we'll daven, we'll make douche, and we'll make motzi, and we'll eat, and then we'll study, and
Is there play weight or something light?
no. Yeah, no, but we would have had to also set up the candle lighting station, which I do not see in the room, so I'm going to assume that it was not set up. Okay, we can't upstairs. Bring back to the Mark, nice to know you to help me find this more green stage. Oh, that's weak.
Page 279. 279.
I think let me come out and get out of the curve.
More figurine will be coming soon. In the meantime, book with your partners, book with your friends. Stage 279. Huh? Wait. Okay. Don't look with your partner. Just wait.
Be patient.
Oh, I must. So what we have left?
Oh, that's too bad. Say, that's the after. So, yeah.
We are.
Ready? Page 279. Ba- Et Adonai Mevorach. Baruch Adonai Mevorach. Can you see that? Maravilha, Senhor, vem lá, se voce, eu caio, caio, Israel, Israel. Yeah. מלכותו ורצון עליהם. משה בני ישראל, לכם שירה ושמחה רבה, וכולם כמוך בן אדוני, כמוך נדבר, שנולדנו אותו ספר, מלכותך ובניך, כי היה לפני משה, זיילי כנו ואמרו, כולם בהם, ונאמר כיפורת יעקב, ויהום יד חזק ממנו, חטא אדוני על ישראל, יתרנו אלוהינו לשלום. ושמור צאתנו והיינו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם, ופרס עלינו סוכת שלומך ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים. וידבר משה ועבר אל בני ישראל, יתקדש ויקדש שמי רבה, ואמר דברי חירותי, וימליך מלכותי, ויכון ובמכון, וחיי בכל בית ישראל, בזמן קריב, ילמדו אמן, יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם המיה, יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנצל, ויתהלל ויתהלל ויתהלל, שמי בקודשה, וכולי עילה, מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, ושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירן ועלמה וימרו. לא מקדש מרבה.
אמן.
מלכותי בחי כל ונכון, על חיי כל בישראל בזמן קרי ואימרו. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא וגדל כל ותואר שמלך קודשה. אילם ובידה ושאלתה תושבחתה ונחמתה ומירם בעלמה ואימרו. שבת צורת כאן וכמון לכל ישראל כדם הולי בשמי ואימרו. אמרנו שמי בכם בלם כל ישראל ואימרו. ונושא שלום נברמה הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואימרו. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל לתת גדולה ויוצא בראשית שלא עשנו כגוי הרצון ולא עשנו כמשפחות הגמה שלא עשנו כבקינו קדם ולא עלינו ככל עמונה אנחנו חיים ומתחיים ומודים לפנינו המקים הגדול in order to give us what to without getting together. In Orlando, Massachusetts. וכתבו את לתת אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
Manish got 12 for mourners and those observing North side.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, יעמד יברא קילותי וימליך מלכותי, בהיכון וביום הכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה ושלמי קודשה. אלא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמידן בעלמה וזמרו. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיה, הקיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום. עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו. Amen.
Rabbi Ring, you may be seated, but we're going to conclude with Yigdal, after which I'm going to invite people to over to the table with the wine. There's a red wine, and then there's another red wine. I don't know, Luden's or Manischewitz or something along those lines. And there's some grape juice, though the grape juice is not poured, so you're going to have to pour your own. But if you gravitate that way, afterwards you leave out and bring it back to the table, we'll make kiddush and then motzi, and we'll dig into dinner.
Week 26.
Yishar Kochacha, as you are getting up to get wine over there, let me also ask you to perhaps designate a couple people from the table to put the Sidurim up on the stage.
Or it's not be so enthusiastic. I guess I think we get that.
Some wine, please do so. Andrew is about to begin kiddush.
You ready? Not yet. Yes, we are. Okay. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei v'ri hagafen. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu asher בחר בנו מכל העם, ורוממנו מכל לשון, וקידשנו במצוותיו. ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה. מועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון. את יום חג השבועות הזה, זמן מתן תורתנו, מקודש זכר ליציאת מצרים. קיבלנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים. ומועדי קודשך, בשמחה וששון הנהלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש ישראל והזמנים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם. והגיענו, הגיע הזמן הזה, שהחיינו, והגיענו, הגיע הזמן הזה, שהחיינו והגיענו 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 הזמן הזה, לזמן הזה, לזמן הזה, לזמן הזה, לזמן הזה, My father liked it.
It's now over. Now we read, there is challah cut out on the table. I am going to do Netilat Yadayim and Motzi, and then everyone can sort of Motzi on their own, so it's not created large backlog.
It's cooked. Nice go. Yes.
Motzi left and lead. I can either take it here or put it on the table. Please enjoy. Basically, goes out and says that, you got to end the life. There is, you don't know what's on there, so you don't know if it's no. So you want to look at it and feel which one.
I agree with this. It's so funny. I'm still talking about Sue. I've been at the track and I try to agree with Anthony. He has to say that too. There's a that's what does that mean that no, it's because they both know how they make this right thing good for but I agree. I don't think it's still but I think, I think
About, you know, when I taught it today, I did like God retreat where you could teach it, and it was almost like they were God, I think God showing you're learning different. It's like God is cheerleading. You know, when I was English, God is cheerleading. Right? It's God is shoulders or God is shoulders. And it also depends on your body. And a lot of what you see was the God is much larger than things like the snow islands were out there. They were things created by man. And part of it was, you know, the life of something happened. You know, when I was young, I thought, you know, like I didn't expect that, oh, that's the life of but the day of dark places, that's something there. And eventually, you can start. And that's the Jewish we don't go that far. We said so after Johnson, and Leo goes, the man falls and a doctor walks by, runs down, somebody else walks by, a friend walks by, what did you do? Are you sleeping? I said, I've been having somebody who was in because the line that I, you know, we've survived our darkest days. And through walking and living the way gives us the strength, the inspiration, the will to do. And so it's something very interesting stuff that I just like theoretically, you know, it's just sort of accepting and that's great. Actually, I know. I was talking Rabbi Dave's class. Something at Alley. And he's been now I do it once these days. You know, put the built right together. Now I'm working, you know, it's not together, you know, rise and just lost. We did that too at the graduation dinner. People that accept, so much fun. Many
I don't see how this can happen. We just discussing there's sort of Linda went to Albany and was in my sorority, but not when I was there. And but we met three of us. Hey guys, can you trust yourself? Yes. Can you be friendly, please? I do research. There's a great restaurant, cafe, Slide Burger. We just practiced that London.
I would recommend you have it next to your interview.
You got the living Albany?
If you go to the lake classes right now, there's actually sort of, it's like a really ride, sort of like being on the
Really?
And then the other thing that's really cool up there is Austin, which is a water. It's exactly up here. There's a lot of
Well, we're on the way to that run yesterday. We found this thing happening in Albany.
I grew up in Boston. I was still in high school.
we all have books.
Oh, really?
What's
Yeah, that's, I know it. I just trying to figure that. Because I just put it like, buttons. So that helps with another, like,
I used to be a absolutely.
oh, I went like in the 90s.
I'm a Jewish educator. I was
I don't know. This week about get over graduation already. She made all these like pictures of her parents.
Really well, yeah.
And it's just like
That's not what it is.
yeah, now when I was like, I tried this one, like, it's not too real.
For a while, I used to be a youth and now, yeah, but it was interesting because it was the opposite.
Okay, so I actually there was time that she was like back to school for familiar, but I remember going, like, I
You
just,
guys are the
yeah.
She was friends with Alicia Rutherford.
Oh. Here's obvious.
Yeah, like I said, because that's, I only think very studies, I know not. Right.
trust. Anytime you wanna come through, come hang out. Great people.
And then like, well, no, it's not that, but it's that just, and I was I'm on part, I was so you know, it's like, it's off on part. It's delivering this thought on it to those students. Yeah, it's actually. More than anything, it's like, they said, planning for 10 hours, and then halfway through, and they said, the thing about this, is that it's and like the entire museum goes or whatever. So you can't just do that, like you just. There's a big Let me invite you to feel free to continue eating and drinking. But we're going to refocus our attention back to our studies. As people are still continuing to eat and drink, we're going to defer that.
So folks, why don't we do this? For those of you who came a little later, we've been looking at the works of Rabbi Harold Kushner, Blessed Memory, particularly his renowned book that really made him world famous when bad things happen to good people. You can do some interesting rabbinic conversations with the book. But we'd really like to hear from you. Many of you have read the book. Even if you haven't, we look at your will. We're talking so much here about bad things happen to good people. What does God have to do with it? Not have to do with it. You know, what's the whole purpose of religion? The whole purpose of prayer? Once you don't believe in a God who's all powerful, as Rabbi Kushner says he doesn't. Let's just kind of open it up. If folks, all we're going to ask that you do, we really only have till 5 this morning, and it's not a lot of time.
Stay focused.
Stay focused. So what if we did this, please? If you're going to speak, just if you can, stand, raise your hand and stand, and just question or comment, but just keep it relatively brief. You know, we were really blessed, guys. We must have 50 people tonight. We've lost a few people just because it's late, but there's still 30, 40 of us. So please, if you want to say something, let's just open the conversation. Okay, David Weinstein.
Because you believe that God is not all powerful. When we pray to him and ask him to do things, believing he can't do them because he's not all powerful. Or how do we know what he can and can't do?
Why did David, that question is so elementary. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Rabbi,
Okay, so, you know, corrections, right? So I had an incarcerated individual who was, unfortunately, it's been a common story of families that came over from Russia in the 80s and young men who came over when they weren't really literate in Russian And we put them in yeshivas, and they didn't get to be really literate in English either. And they ended up involved in drugs. And so I had this poor young man who was in at first green, which is medium, and he kept getting tickets for smoking, and so he would land up in solitary. And he got a ticket for smoking while he was in solitary. You really don't want to know how he got tobacco in there. And he ended up in maximum security prison because he'd gotten too many bad behavior tickets. And his mother would call me every time he landed himself in solitary. You have to help my baby. I don't understand. His sister is in medical school and he's in prison. And I said to her, I got a call from the superintendent of security saying, you got to talk to this woman and tell her to stop calling me. So this is my answer, is that while God is all powerful, as long as that mother keeps smothering that son, he is never going to grow up to learn to make a choice. And so that as a healthy parent, one can say, there's a boundary here. I'm going to visit you in prison. I'll send you letters. I may even put some money in your account. But you made this bed. You've got to lie in it. And you've got to learn to get up out of it. And so that I can, just like we were talking about the ministry of presence that we do as chaplains, of being there with people and listening to them, I find deep solace in prayer, in pouring it out to God. And sometimes that is enough of an answer.
And it's not God's cosmic dispensing machine.
Right.
Right.
That's,
It's not the pop machine.
I think that's the problem with the question, which is, for a lot of people, there's this assumption that you insert, 3 prayers, pull some mystical lever, and out pops whatever it is that you prayed for. And that is, if I assume that God is all powerful, then there's no way that that should have any efficacy whatsoever, because it presumes that I can force God to do what I want, which is ludicrous. I can't force God's hand to give me a pony just because I prayed really hard. So in all honesty, I never prayed for a pony. On the other hand, I did pray to be 6 feet tall, and I didn't get that neither. So it's recasting what it is that's reasonable for us to pray for. We pray for the unrealistic. In his book, he talks a lot about how people, especially as they're watching loved ones who are dying, praying for a miraculous cure. And they either feel like they were rejected, or that the person wasn't worthy of some miraculous cure that God had, but was not giving to their loved one. Well, that's a mess. That's just a mess, because it's just not realistic. It's just not practical. Prayer is supposed to be much more self-reflective. What are the things that I can find the courage to do? What are the things that we need up for a second? What are the prayers that we have to think about? We pray for wisdom and insight and strength and courage. And yes, we do pray for healing, but we also recognize that that's partly our job too. When the Torah says, you go to medical school, then you become a doctor. It's not just your mother talking. All right? Go find ways to heal, make a difference. Those are things we pray for, but when we pray, our procedure are pretty confident saying, ain't so keen on life. Don't rely on miracles.
We pray for rain.
Yeah. We pray for rain, which on one level is we pray that the natural order does what it's supposed to do. Right? Rain is part of the natural order of things. Part of what we thank God for all the time is is not only the existence of a natural order, but the reliability of the natural order. You know, the question becomes, how reliable is that natural order when we muck it up?
Yes.
There's a great Frank and Ernest cartoon. I love Frank and Ernest. Where God is standing in heaven talking with the angels and he's going like, I should have gotten a security deposit. So the natural order is going out the window because of what we're doing to the planet. Prayer ain't gonna help. You know, there's in Kohelet Rabbah, there's this midrash, but God takes Adam around the world and shows him everything and says, by the way, if you mess it up, there is no one who comes along after you to fix it.
I love that in the Reconstructionist movement, originally they took out the second paragraph of Shema. That if you do these things, I'll send you rain in the proper season, and you'll have food in your fields, and your cattle will eat, and you'll eat and be satiated. And a couple of years ago, they put it back because they realized that we need to be exactly responsible for our part in this and look at how our deeds really do affect the world around us.
Sandra and Wendy.
I'd like to get a prayer book because one of the things that I think some of the answer to David's question or another thing to consider in David's question is we were talking about this table. One is how you look at God and the way God works in the world. But one of the things when I used to teach Tefillah to kids that I was always struck by was that before we say Eloheinu Shema in the morning, we remind ourselves that we are grateful for the gift of our body. And I always teach the kids that the openings stay open and the closings stay closed, right? Is that our body works the way that it's supposed to. And because if we can't, and it specifically says if it fails to function, it's impossible to stand before God and do the rest of the morning service, right? And so part of it is the fact is that it's all about when things don't work the way they do. As you were talking about the prayer for rain, because how we impact it, whether it be through climate change or whatever, the world isn't going to work in its natural course. And part of it is how do we deal with and how do we support each other when those pieces don't work?
Wendy, then.
So faith is tied in with prayer. What can we pray to God for then? I mean, you were talking, Rabbi, about you can't really pray for this or for that. What can we pray to God for?
Strength, wisdom, insight, clarity.
So you're saying we can pray to God for things for helping ourselves.
Or just making us live up to the potentiality that we have so as to be the best version of ourselves and impact the world positively.
Well, right, but we're praying that God helps us to do the best we can do to be the best. Okay.
By the way, Wendy, I would say one more thing, and I know David has hand and Raleigh was going to say something also. You know, it's taken me many, many years, sort of my own really hard spiritual work to recognize that while Rabbi Kushner has beautiful sentiments about the sort of the emotional efficacy of prayer, right? Finding God within, finding the strength within. One of the things, and you were touching on it before, Deb, is that he doesn't really entertain, he's not really willing to confront God as mystery, right? Sort of just the fundamental mystery of the universe, of life, of death, of why toggle switches go on and off in DNA, why strips of chromosomes can replicate themselves a zillion times in the human body or in a species, right? And then one little chromosome sort of just, mutates. It's mystery, and the ability to embrace, not to try to understand mystery, but to embrace it, right? And to be in the presence of what Abraham Heschel called the ineffable, that which can't be expressed. He doesn't really touch that. He doesn't get it.
Saying that the more technology, the more we learn, the less involvement God.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying that, but I think you could say that. I guess the only point I would come back to, Wendy, is that maybe part of prayer is just, it's creating the poetry and the structure and the ritual and the ceremony for dealing with the transcendent, right? For dealing with mystery, right? Which is really, and the mystery, in all of its dark and its light, is what the very essence of this magnificent thing that we call life. Right? That's really what it is. This magnificent thing that we call humanity, the Jewish people, the survival of the Jewish people. And that he doesn't talk about. That I wish he would have talked more about. Nobody knows something.
Yeah, if you look, if you have the book, there is a section where he talks about prayer and what good is prayer in this. One of the things that he really emphasizes, this is, we have to go to 134. He talks about going to services to be with community. So he's not dealing with what you're talking about, David, is, so what do you put in here? But rather that you go to services to be with community, to express community solidarity, that you're with other people that will give you the strength to do important things that are helpful to others in the world. And I think about a prayer, I think it's a where it says, it's not enough to pray to you, God, or to end poverty, but we have to go out and help people so that they can earn enough money to feed themselves. It's not enough to, pray to God to stop birth defects. What we have to do is support research and give support to families and assistance to families who have a rough time raising children who need extra help, and so on and so forth. And I think that may be in the Bible.
It is, I think so. What
I
is
think
it?
it's been brought in there.
About sort of possession.
It's funny, it sounds very much, I mean, to me, I can be way off, but it sounds very much like predicate theology, which was very,
Can you say that again louder?
predicate theology, where the best analogy I ever heard was that, you go to, you watch an awards, the Emmys, the whatever, the Grammys, and first thing is, it's like looking up and, God is always up there. If I'm a huge sports fan, you hit a home run and, you see someone, pray and look up and say, kiss and thank God upstairs. But the predicate theology is looking at God sort of on the same wavelength, and what you're doing are God-like acts. That the things that you do are God-like, that you don't have to go to synagogue, you don't have to, but that the acts that you do.
Don't say things like that.
Right. But it's like you can go to synagogue and that's lovely, but you shouldn't feel lessened by not going, but that the acts that you do are God-like, and that's what it sounds like. And also the idea that to put yourself in situations where you have the support that you need. Staying at home alone to me would be the opposite. Being home alone, because the beauty of, and I know he's been mentioned a couple of times, he's a very good, close friend of my family, Rabbi Neil Gilman, Zechron Bracha, in his book Sacred Fragments, talks about how community is really the central thing, the essence of conservative Judaism. And I think there's something really powerful about that, is that you don't feel alone. I mean, just look at the Mourner's Cottage. It's the best example. It's called Kaddish Yatom, the orphan. So the idea is that you're not by yourself. It's like genius. If you really think about it, it makes so much sense that you are required to have 10 people so that you're not alone, so that you're not suffering.
I like to call Morning Minion the 12-step group for mourners, because it's like a chance to step in every morning and go, yes, hi, I have lost. and the people who have been through the process. And I love the conversations over the years of, I've got leftover medical equipment. What do I do with it? How long did it take you till you were ready to empty the closet? All of those discussions that happen because we're in this in community. And I think that as we're talking about community, the experience that's really real and fresh for us were those 2 years that we were not in shul. And how difficult that was. In the first couple of months, I davened alone on my couch, and I was very frustrated on Shabbat that it didn't meet my davening needs. And I finally wrote down and said, I'm going to Zoom into Minyan. And I Zoomed into congregations that had Zoom minions and, had connection with people. And that really enriched my Shabbat. And, if you had asked me before COVID if I would turn on my tablet on Shabbos to go to services, I would have said, you're nuts. But it helped keep me sane through all that.
Let me just add one little note, because I want to bring it away from the communal for a second and back to the individual. And this is not Kushner talking, this is Heschel talking, which if you ever need to read about prayer, read Heschel. So 2 thoughts from Heschel. One is that when we pray, we allow ourselves to see ourselves as God sees us. Second, Heschel, I don't remember exactly where I read it, but he was focused on the weekday Amida, and he said the things that we pray for are to inform us about the things that we should stand for. It's a lesson in activated Judaism.
Let's get David. Let's get David and Lakota then read.
So I want to return for a minute to what Rabbi Sue said about the young man who unfortunately seemed to be dealing with a lot of drug issues and so on in prison. And I get it that there are a certain subset of things that happen to people that are around decision, bad decision. But when I go to shul on Yom Kippur, I have to deal with Una Fonatevka. And I've read all the explanations. I'm sorry. When I read it, it pretty clearly says that to my mind anyway, there's a clear correlation between how you live your life and whether you die by, whether you see whether you live a long life, whether you live a short life, or who shall die this way, who shall die that way. And it seems very, I understand prayers are for the community, but it certainly seems to say reward and punishment, and it's tied to how you would, it's tied to the choices you make in life. And I've had my own personal experience about it. Many of us in this room have had where that's just not, it's not our experience. So how do you tie all that together?
One of the most honest encounters I've had with anybody, I was a chaplain at the VA for 15 years. In just a couple of hours a week. And I walked into this guy's room who was dying of cancer. And I'm talking with him, and he's not affiliated anywhere. And I asked him if he'd like me to make a mishpera before I leave. And he said, 60 years I haven't talked to God. Why should I start now? Right? He says, I'm not going to be a hypocrite just because I've got cancer and I'm dying. My answer to Natana Tokev is very much, this young man was in prison and in all of these things because of the choices he made. He brought this into his life.
He was, but many people aren't. But people dying of cancer at 30 or 40 or 50, that's not a matter of choices they're making.
No, and I don't claim to know, right? Hardest funeral I've ever done, 6-year-old, spina bifida. She was abandoned by her birth mother because she said, I can't take care of this child. She was adopted by friends of mine who were both doctors. And her shunt perforated her colon. Everybody missed it. They took her to the doctor, they took her to the emergency room. Everybody thought it was a flu. Nobody realized that she had meningitis until she died. And I was talking with him afterwards, and I said, so what do you think, how are you doing? How do you think this happened? And it was when I was first dealing with the idea of give and neshamas, and I brought that up to them. And they said, funny you should mention that, because we decided that she came into our lives to teach us that we could be parents. And that she came in this world to learn that she could be loved. And just for being, that she didn't have to be perfect, she didn't have to be accepted. And so that was very healing for all of us, was that sometimes we accomplish our reason for being in a very short time. And that worked for me. Other than that, it's the answer that we all gave you. I can't speak for God. I'm just an employee. It's above my pay grade.
Thank you, David. Lakota didn't read.
Something I heard that you were
A
saying,
little louder, please.
sorry, something I heard you were saying, Rabbi, about.
Which brother?
Actually, Rabbi Dan, about the ritual of prayer and getting the mindset. It made me think of, I'm gonna butcher it, but it's from the Talmud, where they say that after the second temple fell, the gates of prayer were closed, but you know, our emotions, like our cries.
Its tears are open.
Gates of tears are open. Right. And it makes me think of that, because when I get in that, you know, meditative space when praying, and can truly maybe not put into words how I'm feeling when I'm praying, but that feels like more of a connection.
Yeah, and you know, I gotta tell you, Lakota, it's this is another problem. And I haven't been a big fan of this book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. But my own experience has shown me since the first time I read it over 30 years ago, is that just as sort of, you know, the embrace of religion, the embrace of God, is about the embrace of mystery, it's also about a community coming together through ritual and words and all those other things, particularly to open what the Hasidim call Sino roads. That's sort of those pipelines between our emotions, or the world of emotion, and the world of the one, right? The world of the source of all that is, you know. And for Kushner, there's something very cerebral. It feels like something very cerebral about his approach to prayer. It's a beautiful approach, right? And yet, you know, the God I don't believe in literally is a personal God, right? So I can tell you that I don't necessarily literally think, you know, that there's a God up there, wherever there is, if there is a there, right? You know, is sort of talking about subject and predicate, right? There's a subject to whom I'm speaking, but when I'm davening, I'm talking to God, right? I'm talking to God. Because at that moment, the whole experience isn't simply about me meditating upon my values, right? For that, I can do Torah study. For that, I can have a conversation with my colleagues or with any of you, right? But if I really, really want to open to God, all of the rich and evocative imagery of God as Father, as King, as lover, as friend, as teacher of Torah, I don't take any of it literally, and I take all of it, that's all I'm going to say, take it all seriously. Because at the end of the day, that's how you place yourself with all of that metaphor and all of that ritual in this place of inviting the mystery into your life, right? And sensing what it means to connect to something which is both within you and greater than you, that incorporates you as well. You know? And so that's where the emotion piece comes in. I do have to tell you guys a story, because we're talking about prayer, and you know, it's so interesting. So I'm 23 years old, and I'm a rabbinical student, and I'm doing my year of chaplaincy at Sloan Kettering. Now, you guys know that Sloan Kettering is an amazing place, right? I mean, this is a world-class cancer center, but there are people who come there who are extremely sick. This is in some respects the last stop, right? This is where all of the great experts and researchers are going to do their best to do what nobody else can do. So I sort of went down into some very, very dark places with people, sort of doing chaplaincy work. I'm on the 14th floor, which is, sort of a med-surg, I don't remember exactly what it was. It was an oncology floor, basically. So we were doing a lot of medical interventions. I walk into a room one day, and the husband, who's very, very sick, is shivering horribly, and the wife is there, and she's bawling her eyes out. And I come in, I say, I'm Dean Ornstein, I'm the chaplain, and we talk for a few minutes. She tells me the whole story, and I said, do you want me to pray with you? And she says, Rabbi, please do, because I know that God hears the prayer of young people. Right? Well, I'm very young at that point. I'm like 20 years old.
I know that, but
But this is how she's thinking of it, right? Okay. So I'm thinking to myself, and of course, I am, for all of my 23 years, in my own head, I'm just sort of dabbling in my own arrogance. Right? It's like, no, you haven't read Catholic, you don't know predicate theology. God doesn't work that way, Madeline. And that's what I'm thinking. Of course, I'm not going to say that to her. I say, let me pray with your father. I pray with him, he's shivering, whatever it is that's going on inside of his body. She says, thank you, Rabbi, thank you. I come back the next week. And no sooner does she see me, and the husband is in bed, in his robe, he's not shaking, he's smiling, he's on the phone, he's reading the newspaper. She looks at me and she says, Rabbi, I told you God would hear the prayer of a young person. And guys, pardon my French, I'm thinking to myself, shit, what did I do? God. Right, so of course this is sort of blowing a hole in all of my Kaplanian, whatever theology, because I'm such a sophisticate. And I go, what happened? And she says, no sooner had you left than he gets on the phone and he stops shaking and he opens the newspaper and he starts talking to friends. And for years and years and years, I thought to myself, this is just like sort of magical thinking. And then I begin to understand over years, my own personal experience and my experience as a rabbi, that I see you guys nodding their heads here. Somehow that prayer of this young person opened up something inside of him. That even if later on he was going to die from his cancer, it opened up something inside of him. It helped him touch, it, right? That other world, right? That sort of that paper thin line between him and God, the source of life. And it took me years to understand that this wasn't just some, whatever it was, some, I can't even, I don't even know what psychological term to use. There was something real that happened. Was it magic? Was it because of the fact that God heard my prayers and said, okay, poof, Mr. Jones is going to feel better for temporarily? No, I don't buy any of that nonsense. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because at that moment, he tapped into something through the words and the community and the sense of connection that was bigger than both of us, all three of us in that room, and bigger than the world. It's big. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. Have you read? Yeah, read this.
I think a common theme that's running through the discussion tonight is that really the works of the Almighty on earth are really effective for people and through the actions of people, and that a lot of bad stuff happens in this earth, on earth, because people don't do the right things and they don't reach out to their fellow man and they don't help and they don't, they're not comforting and, so I think that's, bad things happen because people don't do the right things. And, God has given us the, pardon me?
That's not, sorry, I'm gonna get it. That's not the only thing. I mean, people get sick for unknown.
They do get sick, but also God has given us, we've made amazing strides in the treatment of cancer and other things, and God has given us the facilities and our brains in which to try to cure those diseases. And those are ongoing efforts. So
it's not only that God's given to us, that God needs us to do it.
right. But also, I think that also comes with when people ask, and they say, what's the purpose of the mission prayer? What's the purpose? What you're saying is you're hoping, you can't, the doctor's not going to always be a miracle worker. What you're hoping is that morning that they're doing the surgery, that their hands are working the best that they can, that everything works itself. You're sort of praying for, the ability to be in the best state of that healer trying to help that person. And it's not a guarantee. So again, I think it goes back to that request for people to go above and beyond a little bit and just be there. If it's a doctor, to be healing. If it's a chaplain, to be supportive, to be comforting. It's interesting. Dan was talking about, bringing that person back to a better state. There's also, and I deal with this every day, and I think Rod Bagginson can attest because I followed in her footsteps. that part of it's also in our position is to be there to get them to the next step, to helping the family come to grips with the reality of death. Like I find that in my position a lot, that my purpose of being there is to help them with that end of life situation, so they're not alone. And I'm holding their hand, and we are praying, but sometimes not praying necessarily to all of a sudden come back when you know that they're past a certain point, that the end is inevitable, but to help them feel comforted that there's someone, that when that person's gone, someone else is going to be there to, at least for the short term, be there to help fill that hole that is immediate. And that insecurity, that sense of what am I going to do after that person is not there? So okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. Andrea and then Lenny, when we do that, and then Bradley. Okay. Andrea and then Lenny, you're after, please.
So, I really, really like Star Wars. So I think God is the force. And
Very Catholic.
prayer is energy. So the act of praying generates energy. It generates energy inside of people, and it generates energy that travels to people. And I think that in my mind, it almost doesn't matter what I'm praying for. There isn't really a what. And I know when I first started praying, I used to prefer to pray in Hebrew because at that point I didn't understand it. And it worked for me that way. And I think that really it's that energy, that it's the energy that is generated from prayer is the part that's healing, the part that it helps us then become stronger, more able to deal, to do. So.
Yeah, it's beautiful. A wonderful way of thinking of it. Lenny, you're up.
I want to go back to the driver who was the drunken driver, because I'm not concerned about him. I'm concerned that he went over the side rail and killed somebody or put somebody in a persistent vegetative state. So why do bad things happen to good people? He was working, he was a good father, he was a good husband. Why does that happen? Because that's where Kushner's book, I think, comes in. And I don't hear that being discussed.
Well,
No, it's a great question.
I guess I would say that it comes in through, maybe when Kushner talks about chaos in the world and randomness, that's what he's talking about. But part of it is the person who caused the chaos is violating the divine mission by doing what they did.
But why did that person die?
That's the chaos, because God doesn't swoop in every time something bad is going to happen. That's Kushner's point. There isn't, when, as parents, we try to teach our kids and guide our kids, and the first time they go off to walk somewhere, yeah, we hide behind a bush and a tree and duck behind a car to make sure that they're looking both ways before they cross the street. We do whatever we can to set them on the right path. And then we worry, because there's randomness and chaos that even if we know they do all the right things, crazy stuff happens in this world. That's Kushner's predicate. That and neither God nor human beings can control all of it.
And why do we say those prayers on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? That if you're good, then you'll have a good year.
If you're thinking about it as reward, then you're not. It just does. Okay, let me say two things. And then I'm giving it to Rabbi Bev to give you the real answer. What is,
Lindy, your question is so elementary.
I didn't say that.
And giving it to the oldest person.
There you go.
in some ways, it goes back to what Andrea said, which is we don't necessarily believe every prayer that's in our prayer book. I mean, think about the entirety of the Mauser. All right, and yes, we make a big deal about Unatana Token. Because we're standing there for a significant period of time intoning at this. And it seems so pinnacle. But maybe it's not. Maybe we should be thinking about, Reshet Sfatenu, or prayers that emphasize the idea that this is the celebration of the birth of the universe. This is the moment of creation that has been entrusted to us. Maybe that's the prayer that resonates with us.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm glad we're back at Unatana, because that's what I was gonna say. I want to go back and kind of refocus on where Dave was with this, because I have a problem with Unatana. And I stand there, it feels like forever on a prayer that I struggle with theologically, because it makes it sound, just like Quinn says, like all of our rewards and punishments are involved in this world. And I'll go back to what I said in my statement. I believe in the Olam Haba. And somehow I believe that somehow God's going to make it work. There are things that make no sense, the randomness of it. I am going to give a personal detail that Dave knows very well, which is that I'm the child of a woman who died in her early 40s, leaving a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I was the 4-year-old. And the randomness of that, the randomness of other people in my life who have parents that died far before their times. There's just something in me that says the injustice of that does not jive with my vision of God. And that is why I think that somehow it all works out, because I do believe that God makes it work. And I know that other people are going to disagree with me, but I don't think everything is logical. I think that there's mystery and things that we will never understand. And I don't have all the answers. Just some belief.
Go ahead.
Sandra was just gonna.
It's interesting. I've always struggled with Unatana Tokef too, but I also wanted to say something related to the piece of like a drunk driver or somebody who takes a violent act, is that the challenge is that we believe in free will too, unfortunately. And the concept that God, while being all powerful, does not mean necessarily that God is going to either, if we were to have free will, unfortunately we have free will to make bad choices too, as people are talking about. And the challenge is that, just lost my train of thought, I apologize, I'm gonna refocus for a second, is that that person who made the choice to, hit the drunk driver, it then becomes incumbent on the rest of us in the community, going back in community, to support the person in their loss, grief, or strife that's going on, and that it gives us an opportunity to be that partner with God to make the world better. And I've always been struck with that concept of the vessel and the shards, is that, and especially in this time of saying Omer, for those people who say, you read at the bottom, there's these Kabbalistic qualities that you look at in the interactions, and part of it is to sort of open up those narrow spaces that we live in and open ourselves up into the opportunities that we have to make the world better. And it becomes powerful as you look at it from day to day, as you head from the narrowness of Mitzrayim to Sinai, right? So it's about that, where are the opportunities for us to become active to make the world better? And sometimes we can't stop at night. Many of you know my husband had cancer that came out of nowhere. But we were lucky enough that he found it quickly, and we feel very fortunate. And in the same time, we had a really good friend who was diagnosed with cancer 3 months before he was and died last year. And so we watched that, where both of them went into that high holiday period, and one of them survived and one of them didn't. And we don't know what it is, but all we can do is be incumbent to be grateful for our and feel very blessed for the medical advances that allowed my family to have some time, but also understand that she lasted longer than she would have 5 years ago. So and we continue to support their families. So there's just opportunities for us. It doesn't make it better, but it also means that God isn't necessarily going to stop every bad thing that happens, even with the power. It reminds me of the question that sometimes we ask for something and sometimes God says no.
I just wanted to reflect also for a second on, after that litany of who will live and die by fire, that whole long thing, we get to the line,
Yes.
right? Teshuva, Tzedakah, Tefillah. What do? And Roa Hazizera.
Yes.
It's not a promise that if you do A, B, and C, it negates whatever's coming down the pipe. What it's a promise of is that the harshness of it will somehow be tempered, if not by God, but by embedding ourselves amidst others. There is no way to guarantee or promise that nothing bad will ever happen to us. Whatever, from minor to major, no kid is going to get through without skinning their knee or fill in the blank. Stuff happens to us. Nobody's going to, or most of us are not going to be so fortunate as to ever get through life without a broken bone or a broken heart or something. But how do we come back from it? How is that mitigated? It's mitigated because we're not alone. And part of it is, and part of what Kushner tries to give back in his book is that part of the not aloneness is the ability to be embraced by God and to embrace God in those moments.
Lydia, I would also just throw out one more thing here, which is, honestly, if you don't like the prayer, don't read it. No, seriously. I mean, and the point that I'm trying to make is as Rabbi Ellenberg was saying before, remember, the Machzor is not a book of theological canon. It's an accretion, it's an accrual of hundreds of years of metaphors and poetry and sort of liturgical response to sort of, the mystery of the presence of God who brings us into a new year and out of an old one, right? And I would also recommend to you, by the way, in Leil Shavuot, in the Machzor, mine, I'll show it to you. There's a beautiful reinterpretation of the Unitarian, which I believe was written by Rabbi Kushner of blessed memory, which you may find just resonates with you then. We want to stop it.
Yeah, we can do that. That was it.
I think we had one more coming in.
The fact that bad things happen to good people, I think has caused many people, many children, as they grow up, to leave religion because it doesn't make any sense. I think that very frequently our belief in God and our faith in God is more because of our own needs. what we want to believe, what we need to believe. To the point I can, where sometimes things happen and we look for excuses for God because we want that faith to continue to be strong. But we've lost them, but we do lose people because of it.
I think part is because maybe the belief is, I mean, Kushner would say this, that belief system is inherently going to fail. There's some people who will be able to get comfortable with the idea that this is divine punishment. And he gives a myriad of examples of people who embrace that model because it allows them to keep God as being pristine, perfect, and give some reason for what happened. But the problem is that it results in exactly what you said, which is, okay, great, God is pristine and perfect and far away and blah, 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 and all powerful and all knowing and all good. And this terrible thing happened because I ate a cheeseburger. All right? Yes, it's ludicrous. Because how could I possibly believe in a God who would be so punitive as to cause this horrific thing because I did one sin? Right? And by the way, the rabbis would say that's Narishkeit. So, but the more that we reinforce that rigid belief, the more we are doing a disservice to everybody. So we need a much more nuanced understanding of God and a personal relationship with God, because ultimately, in the same way that our best friends can sometimes do something that is hurtful, and we can work through that and restore the relationship and realize that you don't give up on a lifetime of friendship because of a bump in the road. But that's only if you've got the personal relationship to begin with. And that's cultivated over a myriad of experiences and encounters. And that's part of the purpose of the various mitzvot that we do that create a nexus and a connection and a knot that ties us to God. It's part of the purpose of prayer and the dialogue. Think about the people that you talk to every day. Or if you could talk to every day. I mean, in some ways, modern technology has been kind of a bracha because I can contact my kids and stay in connection with my kids, even if it's just a quick text back and forth. Daily connection, right? Jody and I, my wife, talk any number of times during the course of the day. One of the things that I miss most palpably since my mother is gone is the fact that I used to talk to her almost every day. And the only other person that I talk to every day is the Eberster, the Holy One. So sometimes our relationship gets a little rocky because there's things that happen. But you get past it because I don't really want to lose that relationship. But you got to build it and you got to have it. And then you can overcome the obstacles that occur. Great.
Oh, you want a last word? Or give it then?
I was just thinking that Rabbi Dan and I argue all the time about whose job is harder. And Lydia, when you were talking, I'm thinking, yeah, and I get to be the rabbi for the drunk driver. I'm the rabbi for the sex offenders. And it's really easy to say, I'm not going to do anything with these people. Let's lock them up and throw away the key. But there is a divine soul in each of them. And the only way to help that soul is to be present with it. And maybe to help it grow from where it's been with the damage that was done to it somewhere along the way. And to help bring that healing so that maybe it won't go on again. And I'm thinking of one incarcerated individual who's going through chemo right now. And I was a very religious guy. He's in a really good place spiritually. And I asked him if he was imaging when he went through chemo, if he was seeing, trying to think of the chemo going after the bad cells and things like that. And he said, no, I say a bracha for the poison. I say a blessing and I thank God that there is this poison that can come into my system and fight this cancer. And I told Rabbi Dunn the other day that he said to me a while back, he said, I'm in a really good place. I know God is with me here, and this is what I need to be going through at this point, and this is what it is, and I'm fine with that. And he said, sometimes I lose it for like a half an hour or so when things are really bad, but then I get it back again. And I said, if you can get that back again in half an hour when you're going through chemo, you're doing good. So prayer is to comfort the discomforted and discomfort the comfortable. And that's what we have.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I want to thank my colleagues. And if you give us a moment, I'll bring us some drinks back to the tables. I just didn't want them to enjoy dinner too much.
Yes.
How do you give that? I've been. That makes it much harder to make a second. We all-
I did.
Shoot.
I said, I expected us to take the second paragraph.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I guess, so, the 6 years, we did. My office was actually, my friend stuff. I'd like to, still, people leaving John.
Yes.
So,
No, actually, I haven't heard one that rabbis come back as tax in Jerusalem. And I think that's awful because Jerusalem are street cats. They are not. I want to come back as an American house cat. Or an Egyptian cat.
A Jewish Jewish.
What did you bring
Page 754. Here I
Go. Thanks, man. Watching to see God. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Guys, please remember, 9:15 tomorrow, both schools over at OHAV, just day one, day two will be separate. So 9:15, in time you can make a difference. Gabriel versus, yeah, please. Okay.
No, you're here. But I, yes, I do that before that. No. What? Guys, this one, not like this, it's, we planned this.
Oh.